Chapter 2, but it's hard, letting go of expectations. I'm a whiner. I love to whine. I am good at it. Some of you will be quite impressed, as you probably haven't heard me whine. That's because I'm a closet whiner. Maybe it's not even a closet whiner, but I don't say out loud what my heart is screaming in my head. Believe me, deep inside where no one else can hear, I'm whining. For some reason, we, humanity, think life will be easy. We use that word so frequently and not always with the same meaning. According to Oxford Dictionary, the word easy means achieved without great effort and presenting few difficulties. Some of those synonyms would be calm, serene, quiet, or tranquil. Well, I know with that. Easy like a Sunday morning? Unless you're a preacher or worship leader. Well, maybe it's just me, but when I learned to sew, I looked for easy patterns. Maybe it was because I was a challenging child, but my mother also made sure things were easy. So straight seams, simple stitches, and nothing with a collar or a zipper. Pinterest and cooking websites all draw you into this easy frame of mind. We want a gourmet taste with an easy approach. We don't want to be in the kitchen all day, just make others think we were. We want easy ways to do everything. We are a bunch of wimps. A bunch of wimps that whine. If easy is easy, then what does hard mean? Oxford tells us that the word hard means with great effort. We team that with the word difficult because it's probably a better word to counter than easy. Needing much effort or skill to accomplish, deal with, or understand, right from the dictionary. Now, part of what we consider easy or hard has to do with what we expect out of life. We predetermine how things will be. That then tends to taint the way we anticipate and reflect upon what we need to do or have thrust upon us. We spend a lot of time worrying about something, and then when it's over, we find ourselves saying, well, that wasn't as bad as I thought. Our thinker has a way of giving us an expectation that isn't necessarily healthy or truthful. So when do we let go of expectations? Probably never. But we can change the way we expect and follow. Taking steps each day out of obedience to God, calling us to love one another, we take the expectations out of us for just a moment. But then we turn around, see the corner, and think that just around the bend, all will be rainbows and butterflies. When it's just more struggles, we start whining. Now, Robert Kennedy said, all of us might wish at times we lived in a more tranquil world, but we don't. And if our times are difficult and perplexing, so are they challenging and filled with opportunity. Well, someone once told me if I didn't expect anything, I would never be disappointed. While that may be true, it's very heartbreaking to think that we would go through life not expecting the rainbow after the rain. And yet, expectations will stop you from loving people. They will stop you because you don't know what to expect or you know too much. When I became pregnant with our first child, they gave me a book at the clinic called What to Expect While You're Expecting. It was a lie. I read the book and they prepared me for what to expect. Except it didn't happen that way. I expected what they told me would happen. Now, I wasn't disappointed, but I thought it had to get worse. So for those of you who had babies quite easily, you quickly learn not to bring up the topic when talking to people who were in labor 24 hours and then pushed another 24 hours. We both went into it with similar expectations, but for some of us it was easier than others. But when things are harder than we expect, how do we act? What is our first response? Step up to the plate and swing again? Or whine? Happiness and expectations are not best friends. If I base my happiness on the expectation to be made happy, I'll never smile again. But if I expect to honor God and love others, I can expect many things, including being disappointed, being surprised, and totally being caught up in loving people in places that I would have never looked. Philippians 2:14 gives us a very simple 7-word command. Do all things without grumbling or questioning. Now, the King James says it a little bit differently. Do all things without murmuring and disputing. But the Message gets even more descriptive. Do everything readily and cheerfully. No bickering, no second-guessing allowed. Grumbling, bickering, murmuring are the basic elements of human behavior 101. And when we start grumbling and murmuring and whining, we find that our want to isn't where it should be. Letting go of expectations of an easy life and no problems or challenges brings us to face with the reality that life is hard. Sometimes there are no detours around hard. There's no smoke screens to hide hard. There's no get out of problem cards you can pull and everything changes. Life is hard. Sometimes we must just let go of what to expect and embrace where God has placed us. Now, I've played the piano my entire life. Okay, well, almost all my life. I remember playing drums at Grandma's while she played the organ, but then I had piano lessons and I played in church and choir and did concerts, and so it does seem easy for me, but God has given me a gift. Yet, when people hear me play, I hear quite often, "I would give anything to play like you." My response is, no, you wouldn't, or you would have. If someone wants to be a virtuoso, there comes a degree of commitment, sacrifice, and lots of hours inside a practice room at McGrew or Griffin Hall in college. For those who weren't willing to pay the price, there was no senior recital with accolades. For those not willing to practice, there's no phone call saying, "Can you accompany the high school choir?" For those not willing to commit, there's no reward. Of course it's hard. Galatians 6:9 is a great verse for quitters. "And let us not grow weary in doing good, for in due season we will reap if we don't give up." Now, we could replace the words "doing good" with just about anything. Exercise, eating, studying, you name it, we can quit it. What does perseverance really mean to us? It must not mean much, because we leave it quickly. We try, but when it becomes hard, we quit. And we whine while we quit. And while we're whining and quitting, we open Romans 5:4, which tells us, "And endurance produces character, and character produces hope." I want endurance. I want to be able to stick with things. But I also enjoy quitting. There is an endorphin in quitting. Believe me, I know. Perhaps it's not the endorphin of quitting, but the pressure to succeed is now off my plate. And if I just listened to God and did my best and finished what I started, I wouldn't need to whine. I wouldn't need to feel what I expect of myself is what God expects of me, because I'm only disappointed in myself. I have to let go of what I think is expected of me, let life be hard, and make it work. Persevere. Don't quit and stop whining. Ouch. Now, it was many years ago. Tyler was in first grade, and I know he was in first grade because he was memorizing Psalm 23. Tyler had a photographic memory, which did not come from his mother. He could memorize quite easily. I needed to put it into a tune that I could remember, and then it's a stretch if I can pull it off. We were going to St. Mary's after school one day to sing. I can't remember who, when, where, why, but someone put me into contact with people who sing in the hospitals. Now there are programs with music therapy, and people get paid to do it. But I just took the kids after school, and we wandered around the hospital following our leader who introduced us, and we sang. It was at the end of our time there that she asked if we would be willing to go to Domitilla and sing to Sally. Well, I don't remember if that's her name, but I'll call her that. She had been walking through a parking lot, and the cart accident left her paralyzed from the neck down. All she could do was smile. Every bristle in my body went on high alert. That's one thing I didn't want to do. Well, I don't like hospitals anyway. And I don't mind encouraging people, but this was going to be awkward. And this was going to be hard. But I also don't do well at saying no if I don't have a good excuse. So off we went up to her room. She introduced us, and we sang, standing as close as we could so she could kind of see us as we sang. I didn't know what else to do. I have gag reflexes, and machines were doing things that just made me want to lose my sandwich. I just wanted to get out of there and go home. That's when Tyler did the hard thing. He asked her if he could quote Psalms 23. She said yes, and he went over to the side of the bed. Now, he didn't just stand by the bed. He got very close to her, as close as he could, much closer than his mother, who was about losing it on the other side of the room. Calmly and loudly, he quoted Psalm 23. We left and went home, and I've never forgotten that day. Day after day, having nothing to do but lay. And I thought it was hard to just stand there and give 10 minutes of my time. I didn't realize I didn't know what it meant to live with no expectations, ever. That's hard. Last year, I went to visit my friend Wayne in the hospital, and I took my mandolin, and he played, and we laughed and told stories and just enjoyed being together. And when I got done with his room, I stopped to visit a lady from church who had also suffered a stroke. She was unresponsive, and I spent a few minutes with her husband and family and prayed with her before I left. The next night, I went back to hang with Wayne again, and as I left, I briefly thought I should stop and see Carol, but I didn't want to. Isn't it interesting how we identify things we don't want to quickly? I didn't want to. I don't like hospitals. Jamming with Wayne was a lot different than being in a room where the only expectation was death. That's hard, and I don't like hard. I like easy smiles and happy thoughts. Well, while I walked, I rationalized that I had a meeting. I needed to grab a bite to eat, and I had just enough time to get to the car, stop and grab something to eat, and be at the meeting. But somehow my legs didn't get the memo my brain and heart had sent to each other. My feet turned and started down toward Domitilla. I kept walking. Now, I have learned through life to not only listen when God talks, but to follow when God walks. Those legs weren't mine that turned the corner and continued down the hallway. Those were God's legs walking. I went into the room and took her hand and talked to the son and husband, then asked if I could play. Mandolin and I picked a few hymns, but my head was looking at the clock. It's hard, life. It's hard sometimes, death. I don't do hospitals, remember? I kept playing and hoping I didn't start gagging. That's the one thing God didn't give me the ability to do, is to be around body fluids and sounds. And I kept playing. I knew her well and knew what her favorite songs would be, as often when we played during coffee time, she'd be singing and smiling along with all the songs. So after about 15 minutes of playing, I felt the nudge to pray. So I quit playing, took her hand, and prayed. Her husband and son were at her side near her head. When I finished praying, I just put the mandolin away and let myself out of the room. I kept swallowing fast as I got to the car. Forget food, I had no appetite. We had just begun the meeting when my husband texted me that she had passed. Later, her son would tell me that she passed as I finished singing. And I almost didn't go because it was difficult and hard for me to handle stuff. Now remember, difficulty is needing much effort and skill to accomplish and deal with or understand. No one was around to hear me whine, and no one cared that it was hard for me to watch, listen, or smell what was happening in the room where death was waiting. God didn't really care about what I thought and that it was difficult. God didn't really care what you think is needing much effort. God wants us to put away our expectations and just obey. It may be hard. It may be uncomfortable. It may be totally out of my ability. But God doesn't place expectations on us. He just expects us to love people. Loving people is hard. Loving people is difficult. Loving people takes you down hallways you would rather not walk. Loving people also gives you the honor of being a light in an otherwise dreary day. And if all you can do is quote Psalm 23 like a first grader who stepped up and did all he knew how to do, and do it, and don't make excuses.